Stephen Auth, a veteran investor on Wall Street, deepened his faith through art and now helps other Catholics discover God with a special tour through the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. This year, he published a book called Pilgrimage to the Museum, Man's Search for God Through Art and Time, which allows readers to take this spiritual journey through the Met from the comfort of their own homes. I recently spoke to Steve about his new book, his faith, and his love of art. Steve, it's so great to have you here to discuss this wonderful book. I dove into it and I couldn't put it down. Pilgrimage to the Museum.
Thank you, Montse.
Let's get started just about your personal journey coming back into the church. A lot of people see these books and they think this person must be, a zealot, really into the church all of his life and well-formed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes the book attractive to people is it's written by a broken vessel. I grew up as an altar boy, very Catholic family, but by the time I got finished with college at Princeton, I was at best an indifferent agnostic. And my journey to the faith started to come back slowly through marrying my beautiful bride, who is a devout Catholic. The kids get raised. But about 25 years ago, I had a near-death experience, and a priest came up to give me last rites and my first confession in 25 years. And when we got done with that, he said, Steve, you're a guy with a lot of talents, and your big problem right now is that you've been using them for yourself and not for God.
Wow.
And I resolved if I survived, I was going to turn my talents and use them for God. And that led to our mission work on the streets of New York, which a lot of folks know about now. And this second mission, because I had, a lot of background in art history, and we love taking people through the Met. So we just started doing that years ago. But at some point, and it's described at the very beginning of the missionary of the Pilgrimage to the Museum, there's this point where I have this epiphany that looking at art through the lens of purely classical art historians, which kind of sanitize and make it scientific, and it's kind of sanitize the paintings, is a good place to start. But you need to have God in the conversation. And we decided to take a look at art from the perspective of God being there, the image of beauty that he places in our soul, the image of himself. And we just redid the entire tour, and it became a pilgrimage, starting from ancient Egypt right up through the moderns.
It's interesting that you chose art that isn't necessarily religious. That's something that some people have commented about the reality of, well, if you want to talk about religion and art, there's a lot of religious art we can talk about.
Yeah.
Why choose things that aren't codified as religious?
I think maybe partly is sort of coming from my own background and realizing that we're all seeking God even when we don't realize we're seeking God. And I always ask the pilgrims at the start of the tour, if you could just work with me on this. And I quote from Ecclesiastes how, I've placed the timeless into their hearts such that they'll never know the works that I have done. And just work with me on this. And at first they're a little suspicious, but as you start to go through and you see, my goodness, they were seeking God. And then you start to see these themes occur and recur over thousands of years with different artists in different periods of time and different styles of working art. You begin to say, wait a second here, there's something greater at work. In some ways, the conclusion of the whole exercise for me is when, written up in the epilogue. And I asked myself, is this man seeking God, or is it God seeking us in some ways, right, through art?
Do you think that there is one nugget, one story, one reaction that you've had from these tours that really kind of stands out for you, whether it's about history or maybe a faith journey or someone who saw something or reacted in a way you just didn't expect?
Well, almost every night when we go, we unpack the tour over dinner. And we have little prayer cards. We go around and ask people their favorite painting. And what's remarkable to me is how so many different paintings get chosen. And so some people are touched in a way you wouldn't have thought, and they often will be crying, actually, over dinner. because of the impact on them. But everyone's impacted differently. There's a broad variety of art in the pilgrimage, and people will always find their favorite one, in the storyline.
I found a favorite one in the pilgrimage through the book. I can't wait to go to the museum at some point and really live it. But for me, it was the journey that we take with Bathsheba, where you talk about the relationship between the artist and God and where he was in his faith journey and how that context is almost so much more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the Toilet of Bathsheba is the painting you're referencing, Montse, and actually the book starts there because that's where I had this sort of epiphany. And in some ways, an art historian will tell you, well, this is a painting from Rembrandt's Oriental period. He was very interested in things of the Far East. It's one of his only nudes, and this is this beautiful image of Bathsheba. And as I'm standing there looking at it, listening to the docent, I'm thinking, well, everything she's saying is absolutely accurate, and in ways absolutely wrong, because it's not a painting about Bathsheba at all. It's a painting about David, and in some ways, it's a painting about Rembrandt himself, and in a deeper level, it's a painting about each of us, right? It's about the slippery slope of sin, and you see this image of Bathsheba with darkness all around her, and the light is shining on her, right? So that's sort of, the devil has a way of focusing us on the wrong thing, if you will. And what we're looking at in that image is not actually Bathsheba. It's the image of Bathsheba.
Yeah.
In Rembrandt's mind, or let's say in David's mind, is he up in the dark tower up there, looks on and begins to imagine, what a night with her might be like. And it's what a priest friend of mine always says, Steve, the first look's not your fault. The second look is your fault. And this is like the third look. And, then, it's the beginning of the slippery slope for David, right? He invites her over. They have an affair. Then she gets pregnant. They've committed adultery. He tries to cover it up. It's the slippery slope of sin. Rembrandt at that time is himself having an affair with his housekeeper. And there's this garter on Bathsheba's calf, garter mark, which the art historians at the time, or the community at the time, and art historians later always talk about, what was he doing with this garter? I always felt it was Rembrandt's way of saying, that's my housekeeper there.
About me.
This is a modern woman. This is not Bathsheba at all. And I think I think of the Toilet of Bathsheba as Rembrandt's Psalm 51. David famously writes Psalm 51. It's one of the great penitential psalms. It's often been given to me as a penance.
Create a clean heart, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great penitential psalm, but in a way, I think the painting of it becomes Rembrandt's Psalm 51.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful reflection. And do you think that part of the inspiration for this is the fact that the church has used beauty as a reflection of truth in the past, and there's a tradition of it within the church?
I always felt like the churches were built to show the miracle of the Mass, right? I mean, it's heaven on earth inside of a church. This is where God comes to us through the Eucharist. And all the beauty of the church, of the churches and the paintings, were designed to help us understand that this is God. This is God's beauty. I mean, the Renaissance painters were trying to paint things through the eyes of God. That's why they're so beautiful and so perfect.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I hope that everyone will not only read this, but figure out how to get on this tour with you.
Thank you, Montse.